Good evening. This is June 8th, the monthly Burlington Electric Commission meeting. And thanks everybody who might be watching and everybody here. First up on the agenda is the agenda itself. Wondering if there are any modifications or changes? No. Okay, so second is minutes from the May meeting. If folks found any substantive content-related items that should be addressed or edited? No? Then if folks are ready to make a motion to approve?
Move to accept the agenda as presented.
Oh, you mean the minutes?
Or the minutes, yes.
Without friendly comment from the, so is that clear now? Second.
Yes.
Okay.
All in favor of approving the minutes from May? Aye. And next we have the public forum. I do not see anybody.
Mr. Ellis, but he will be speaking in executive session.
Although also I would say.
I'm here at the request of Darren. I'm not a member of the public, I'm counsel.
Yep. Thank you. That's how I view you. I mean, you are a member of the public, but, well, for folks watching at any time you feel like you have an issue or a question, we have a great customer care team with Mike Kenrick at the head. And then also you can always reach out to commission members as well as to the staff generally. And then next we have Commissioner's Corner. This is an opportunity to raise some questions or comments that aren't on the agenda that are at the Commissioner's tip of tongue, top of the mind.
Just a quick thank you to Mike. Mike said last time that the performance measures report would be online in a few weeks. I looked today and it is.
Just today, actually.
It made the timing.
Like you missed the kudos for the performance measures.
Yeah.
Being up and available.
Been available.
It would be bad to say it was because I was nuking my pizza, wouldn't it? Hey, team effort, Adam Raven, huge contribution, and many others. So glad we got it done.
Thank you. So without anything else, we'll move to the General Manager's update. This is an oral update.
Thank you. We had several items that are on this list actually went to the City Council and Board of Finance on Monday and were unanimously approved. So we had our rate change approved unanimously. It can now be filed with the PUC. And again, thank you to the Commission for supporting that effort. We also had unanimous approval for these two district energy items that I mentioned in the update. Creation of the 501c3 with Evergreen running it to manage the further district energy development work. I believe we have a full agreement among all the parties to the district energy work that will basically create a scope for the remainder of 2022 in terms of what tasks we're going to be working on together. I expect to have that letter agreement signed by the end of the week by University of Vermont Medical Center, UVM, the Intervale Center, Evergreen, the city, BED, and BGS. And then that is intended to take us to hopefully a go, no-go decision by the end of the year. There are headwinds for the project, as I mentioned at council. Construction pricing remains at a very elevated level. Our hope is by the end of the year we can actually go for real construction pricing as opposed to indicative construction pricing, and that will wring out some of the excess that there might be from the bids that we're getting now. We're also hopeful that inflation will be lower by the end of the year. Interest rates for financing are expected to be more favorable by the end of the year than they are now, according to the Evergreen Bond Desk, and we're working on the fuel price piece of this as well. Try to get the best option from McNeil that still covers our costs and some return for the joint owners, but also makes the district energy project pencil a little bit better. So we have the grant acceptance from the Leahy funds. We have the 501c3, and we'll be continuing that work, keep the commission updated I expect we'll also provide an update to the TUC, the Transportation Energy Utilities Committee of the City Council. I don't know if that'll happen now or closer to the time when we're making a go or no-go decision, but they expressed interest in that. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, so understood that the fuel at McNeil, everything has increased in price, construction costs as well, but so too has, natural gas. And so I wonder how are you looking at all, and are you seeing, for example, we see diesel is at a higher price than, if you go and you pump your gas, just generally. Are you seeing perhaps a little bit more favor to some of our potential project partners to join McNeil because there would be perhaps less fuel volatility?
Short answer is yes. We haven't rerun the numbers yet, but our expectation is the pretty significant increase in natural gas costs is going to be favorable economically for the project. We have had a run-up in certainly diesel and other fuel costs as well. What we're trying to look at is potentially just delinking some of the energy market volatility from the price for the steam from McNeil, and having that be a little more stable and predictable based on maybe some different metrics. So if we're able to do that and natural gas costs are going up, overall the delta between the two should be more favorable than it is in the prior analysis that we had done. So additional items on here, policy development. We're working with different stakeholders on this idea of having additional buildings policy under the charter change that was recently passed. We had a good meeting with the University of Vermont. We'll be talking with them more. We're scheduling a meeting with University of Vermont Medical Center. We're working with the Building Electrification Institute, which is looking at policies that are in place in places like Denver and New York that at least have a similarly, maybe not as cold a climate, but a similar cold climate. And we're looking particularly at the large existing commercial buildings because that of the different sectors that we're looking at is going to be the most tricky, I think, to develop policy around. It's a little easier to set policy for new construction, building that hasn't been built yet. But if we're going to set policies that are going to apply to existing buildings, we want to be incredibly thoughtful about how that will work for the building owners and how they will manage whatever is expected of them. Our first report back is July 18th. That will be an initial report. It's not a final report. We'll have additional policy development, public engagement, other process that will go after that date as well. It's possible we may have, at least for new construction, some concrete recommendations by that point. The other items, one of them was actually intended to go on the 6th to City Council, but we ended up having to hold it over. But it's the mention of these new positions and update of vacant positions. We're definitely interested in increasing our capacity for the net zero energy initiatives. Particularly excited that we're going to have a new position in sustainability that Emily Stebbins-Wheelock and Jen Green have developed that's going to focus on the nexus between net zero and equity. I think, strategic direction later this evening, we have some great language in the strategic direction around that. We've had some really good initial conversations with the Trusted Community Voices program with CEDO. This would be a position that could really further that work in a lot of meaningful ways. So we're excited about that, excited about adding capacity for energy services. We've had a vacant position there during the pandemic. We didn't have quite as much work, certainly in-person work. We're seeing hopefully that we'll have more of that going forward. And this position will be more focused on net zero residential, heat pump adoption, and HVAC, some light commercial work as well. And then for the first time in a long time, we're looking at creating a position, although it's funded by reducing some of our outside services costs related to the IT Forward project. So we'll be bringing all of those to the Council Board of Finance on the 20th. And the last item is a save the date for September 17th, 2022, with a rain date of the 24th, for what we're hoping is going to be an excellent first of potentially many net zero energy festivals. What's the tagline, Mike?
Oh, wow.
Oh, I put him on the spot.
Oh, wow.
You did.
A supercharged.
Supercharged day of family fun.
There we go. Okay.
I think that's what it is.
I think that's what it is too. Sorry to put you on the spot while you're eating.
That's okay.
But we're excited to host an event because a lot of times we spend time in the community with other organizations at their events talking about Net Zero, talking about our programs. We do the Lake Monsters and Art Hop and the farmers markets, and we're expanding those efforts. We're going to have the Old North End Farmers Market. We'll have a presence there this year as well. But we really thought this could be an opportunity to bring folks together around this particular mission, the climate mission of our community, and have our preferred vendors, our EV dealers, our heat pump installers join us and table at the event, try to highlight some non-fossil fuel-based food vendors who might be able to join us. The farmers market will still be going on down the street, so we'll have hopefully some good interchange of traffic between the two events. I believe Champ is scheduled to make an appearance, and we'll have kids' activities and art. We'll have bucket trucks for Touch a Truck, and we'll have Power Town, our safety exhibit that our line workers are able to staff. And we'll have some live music and a DJ in between the live music. So our hope is this will be a really fun event. We'd love for the commission to join us. So we wanted to get it on your radar, even though we're still in the planning phase, just to make sure that you could put it on your calendar and at the appropriate time, once we've got it fully ready to go, share the word with neighbors and with the community. And I think that was everything I had for the GM report.
Questions, comments, any observations from the monthly update? No?
Just, well, I guess one clarification. So the rate change, that went, the city council approved that? So we've been talking about that for a long time. It finally goes in August, right?
That's right. So we'll file it mid-June, and then it starts the 45-day clock with the PUC, where it can be a surcharge starting August 1st. And then, you know, the PUC process will still play out from there, and it's conceivable if they had a change that would be applied later on to customer bills if there was any differential. But our team here is working hard to prepare the rate case for the PUC, but the city council approval was the last local approval that we needed to be able to file.
And we started talking about that, right? I feel like I've seen a little bit on Front Porch Forum that it's coming, and
Yeah, during, I think it was the day we first brought it to the commission, we did a public announcement. And then there have been a couple of news stories since then. WCAX, Vermont Digger, and 7 Days have all covered it in some variation or another at different points. So I've certainly seen it on social media and different folks talking about it. I think, you know, just to contextualize further, because I know even though we're in the process of filing it, and you've approved it, there's still a lot of discussion around it. The 3.95%, I looked at just some other fuels, and the costs for other fuels is going up, some cases 30+% over the course of a year-over-year comparison. So even though we never like to raise rates, even though we, you know, would prefer to hold rates steady, all things equal, I think the strategy of having moderate rate increases to keep up with the cost of doing business makes sense. But also in this environment, folks are paying just a ton more at the gas station, for example, than they were a year ago. And this is a relatively good, you know, deal in that context. And it was something that we shared as well at City Council.
How was that received? Because I did hear at a NPA meeting some comments about, you know, unfortunately Burlington Electric is having to raise rates again, and it sounded to me, this was before Monday night, but, and, you know, it kind of made me tilt my head because I thought, actually, that's, you know, the hope or the idea is not to raise rates if we don't have to, but we'd rather do it in smaller increments rather than a huge shock.
Precisely. I think, you know, one of the news story headlines was Burlington Electric raises rates for the second time in 2 years. I can write the headline going forward. We're going to try to have rate adjustments each year and not catch customers by surprise with something like what we had with the 7.5%, which is understandably not welcome in a given year. Nobody wants to see a double-digit rate increase. No one wants to see 7.5%. So I think that's something that we really have tried to communicate. We communicated again on Monday and to the media is most utilities do adjust rates year to year. We had this extraordinary run where we didn't have to for 12 years. We're not going to repeat that. And you know, some of the utilities have quarterly adjustments that don't get as much attention because they're not a full rate case. They're under what we call alternative regulation in Vermont. But you know, GMP or Vermont Gas, they look at quarterly adjustments for their fuel costs. We only do this on an annual basis, and in some cases we hadn't done it at all on an annual basis. So to the extent we can, I want to socialize and normalize the idea that we're going to look at rates each year and try to have modest adjustments just to keep up with the cost of doing business, our workforce needs, inflation, et cetera. And hopefully that'll be well received, but obviously there will be some folks who will have concerns, always.
Yeah, and on Monday, did the council sort of hear that and go, huh, okay?
I was, yeah, I mean, we certainly had good discussion, but I was very pleased that we had unanimous approval from the council. I'm not sure we had that last year. I think we had a very strong vote last year, but I don't remember that it was unanimous. And I think we've conveyed very clearly to the council what our plans are, how we're doing this. And at least for folks who had looked at our earlier projection of a 4.9, then the 3.95 was welcome in that context too.
That has to be looked at in the context of the previous 12 years.
That's right.
It's the whole picture.
We're still, if
Not
you look at
just
that time
in
frame,
these 2 years, you get, yeah, you gotta.
well,
look at
well
it.
below inflation and many other costs over that time frame. That's right.
Can't forget that part of the story.
Agreed.
Okay, I think we're ready for the financials. Good evening.
Hi. So I think the best way to share the financials is to join the Teams meeting, right? Great. Share my screen. So, hide myself. For April, I've presented a bunch of good months in a row. April was not as great a month as some of the previous months. We had a net income for the month that was negative $1.6 million as compared to what we had budgeted was a negative 1.1 million. So that's about 560,000 worse than what we had projected on the net income side. However, so that's for the month. However, for the year, we're still in great shape. We're still ahead of budget by almost $900,000. We have a net income currently over $2 million. We had only budgeted at 1.1. So April wasn't great, but the year still, we're in really good shape. So on the revenue side for the month, sales to customers were down almost $200,000, $194,000. The residential sales were up $96,000, but our commercial sales were down $265,000. There were fewer heating degree days than budgeted, just as a note. Our other revenue was up $18,000, driven primarily by the EEU. In April, there was no rec revenue for the month of April. It's not a rec revenue month. On the expense side, it was unfavorable in total by $243,000 both on power supply and the operating side. The power supply side was down $177,000, basically due to how the market cleared. And I'll let James add in if he wants to, but we're still researching sort of what was going on in April. Sorry, yes. They were up $177,000 as compared to budget, and we can provide more information on that once we have some more data. On the operating side, the main driver for our over budget was we did not budget for revenue bond costs in April that we incurred as a result of issuing the revenue bond. That was about $342,000. That was offset by expenses being under and on the labor side of things and some other operating expenses. The taxes, same story as before, down to the pilot change that'll appear, through the end of the year. And our other income was under budget due to lower than anticipated customer contributions. Over to the year-to-date piece.
So would you say it's predominantly the sales to customers combined with power supply? I'm just looking at the two largest ones, but.
Sure. I think in a nutshell, right, we collected less than we expected and we spent more than we expected, so.
No, but I was wondering if there was one that you felt was unique. Is it mostly the heating degree days that perhaps, nothing particularly unique?
Nothing really jumped on that.
The revenue bond one's non-recurring, though.
Yes, the revenue bond was a one-off.
So that won't happen again.
Yep. So for the year, still in good shape. We are basically on target for sales to customers. We are under slightly by $58,000, which is pretty incredible. Residential is up almost $1 million, and non-residential is down almost $1 million compared to budget. So in the sort of specific categories, we're different, but in total, we're right where we need to be.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
As usual, I may have asked it before. The Champlain Parkway, 400,000 plus. Is that because they're on schedule or because they're off schedule? In other words, is it anticipated or is it something on there and it's causing a problem?
Munir might be able to, or Andy.
I mean, when we put the budget together, it was expected to start, but then the deadline.
Okay, got it.
Great. And on power supply revenues, it's the same story that it's been in prior months, as a result of the rec production being down is lower than anticipated when we budgeted. Year-to-date on the expense side, power supply is still ahead of budget by nearly 1.7 million, which is about 6% below where we budgeted. Purchase power is under, transmission is under, fuel is under year-to-date. Our operating expenses are also down over $1 million, similarly at 6%. Again, this is a variety of things, labor, timing of expenses, et cetera. Our other income is down, as I've said, in previous months due to that $175,000 of ARPA that was assumed in this year, and our customer contributions that haven't come in that we assumed in the budget. That is my overview of the month. Is there any questions on that? Great. I'll jump to the capital side. So we're about 49% of the way through the budget on the capital spending side. We anticipate part of this is probably due to the timing of the invoices associated with the McNeil overhaul. So the overhaul took place in April, and we are getting invoiced and processing those. So should catch up in May. And then if you recall, there's also a couple projects that were in the budget that we know we're not going to do. The Velco equity, that's not going to happen this year. Some IT forward expenses and the bucket truck that we will not buy this year. On the, our cash position is better than it was in March. We're at $11.2 million compared to 10.6 or 10.7 million at the end of March. Our credit rating factors are still in good shape. The debt service coverage ratio is a little less than it was in March, down to 4.59. Our adjusted debt service coverage ratio also down a little bit from the prior month to 1.21, and our days cash on hand is at 139 days, which is up from the prior month, which was at 138.
I think, if I'm remembering correctly, the ARPA arrearage money would have been included here. So that's, if you're seeing, that part of the cash bump would be that the $1+ million we were able to get to customers is now officially part of our cash position.
That's correct. That happened in April.
Yep.
So we'll likely see that get a little bit back to normal next month, perhaps.
That's pretty high. 139 days as of April is a pretty good metric. I would expect it might moderate a little bit before the end of the year. That's, our projection is that it will moderate. If it doesn't, that's great, but we're assuming it's going to be closer to, what was it, 8.6 million or 8.5 for the beginning of the next fiscal year.
Could be harder for a rate case if it stays at 139.
Well, the cash is only really part of the equation, really. So, yeah, there's a whole nother set of factors going into that. We, all things equal, be happy to start the year with more cash if it means something went well, but, yeah.
Questions, comments?
No, I agree. It's just a little bit of a perception thing though, right? If you're asking for more money and you have a lot on hand, but.
Right.
All right. Thank you. So next we have the 2022-2023 draft strategic direction, and this is a discussion. If I recall correctly, normally we discuss it the first month and we vote on it the next after we submit some comments, if we have them.
That's exactly right. We were planning to bring this back to you in July. So as we do every year, we seek feedback throughout the company on the different pieces of the strategic direction. I think we've done great work with the commission over the past few years in really honing the values, the vision, the strategic objectives. Those are hopefully stable and in the correct kind of frame. So we focused our edits on updating the different initiatives, and we had very few, as you saw. And these all essentially came from our teams. There was the one added in the customer community section came from Energy Services and is focused on additional website tools for heat pump evaluation, which is something we're interested in. And then under the manage budget and risks responsibly, previously we had developed the 5-year plan, I think with the net zero energy revenue bond and some more work having gone into that. We wanted to reframe the language a little bit to reflect some of the work we've done. And then our IT team had the mitigate cybersecurity risk language a little more specific than what we've had in the past. But in looking over this, a lot of the initiatives here are things that are ongoing, that's work that's current, that we're continuing. And I guess I don't view it as a bad thing to the extent that it's a relatively stable document, because I think we've gotten it to a place where it really does reflect well the current and future work that we're planning. But always interested to hear if the commission has thoughts on items that maybe not included in here, or items that are included that you would have different thinking or wording. We'd be happy to take that back and look at it.
I'll just say, I think it's a lot, right? So it's sort of like these, you have the vision and then the engaged customers and communities sort of a goal and then their objectives underneath them. And so if it's really static, does that mean we're not making progress? Like, I guess there's different schools of thought, like, should they be just a handful of things that we're really focused on, or should they, but this is a little more of a kitchen sink approach.
Yeah.
And then I find in general, like, it's just, and maybe it doesn't matter because people turn on the light switch, the lights come on, everyone's happy, right? And the electric bill doesn't come up. But it is complicated.
Yeah, well, the strategic direction, definitely, there are pieces here that we do. In the past years, we had more of a work plan in the initiatives. And I think we've moved away from that to having things that are a little more durable, that reflect kind of ongoing work that we have. One goal that we've had is that everybody in the company can see a piece of their work reflected here. So that definitely adds content and adds some complexity. But on the other hand, we've tried to really make it a document that people feel ownership over, and that reflects on each area. Each of the centers that we have a chance to give feedback. But yeah, I think a lot of the program kind of initiative language are items that you may never reach completion on, that you're always striving for. And some of them are things that we can check off the box and say we've done this. So yeah, I definitely agree. It's a longer and more complex document, and it fits in one page. On the website, here it's a couple pages.
Yeah, and there's some like big strategic things and then some very specific things, which is, I think,
For me, looking at it in tandem with looking at the strategic direction dashboard is helpful, because that's sort of, so in the packet, it's, I guess, page 18, but that sort of helps, compare, contrast, so that you can actually see where we are making progress, not actually see, but so that you can see where the progress is and how much is being made for these different initiatives. And then I guess in combination with the updated report, that's always helpful as well, but.
Yeah, I mean, there are some of these, like, as I look at it, we have on here about, this new community ambassador program. That's in the budget this year. We're going to do something with that this year. It's possible next year we may either want to check that off and say we did that, or reflect it with different language. So it definitely should be a kind of an ongoing process of keeping track of it. But this year we found the language to be relatively reasonable in reflecting what we're working on.
I'll take a look in combination with the dashboard.
Yeah.
And see.
I mean, it's not a one-for-one.
Right.
Because originally, I don't think you were here when we started the dashboard. Originally, the dashboard was like, it was really, really, really long. And so over time, Emily's been whittling it down. But it does help, connect the dots between sort of the vision, which may appear to be static if we don't change it, but then also what the stats are.
We'll have to revisit the vision in 2030.
Because then you'll be net zero.
We'll be net zero, hopefully, and we can set some additional visionary goals.
Were you insisting?
I like the level of detail. A couple of points that I specifically lock in on, and they're there. So I think it's good. And your point is great about balancing it against the the tally.
Well, to that point, maybe we have a little asterisk that says, you know, please look in very small print, because I know it barely fits on a page, but please look at strategic dashboard to see metrics results.
Yeah, we have this posted on the website. We could definitely add a link or something to take you to that page, maybe. Looking at Mike, because he and Adam will be the ones who ultimately do that.
So I do have a question, which is, you know, this whole room knows that we need more than just heat pumps. We need weatherization, we need air sealing, we need, you know, all sorts of tools from the toolbox. So why would we only say on item number 6, provide website tools so that customers can evaluate both cost and carbon savings from only heat pump technology installations as compared to sort of the net zero home initiative that you guys have been working on?
Yeah, and I'll add a comment, but Mike may have further thoughts. I think we've had kind of ongoing this question on our team about the heat pumps and the economics and the customer kind of view of it. And the weatherization work, by and large, gets done by Vermont Gas. So we are in as good a position to kind of have that type of calculator on our website, although we could have, as you mentioned, we have a kind of net zero home approach that we're trying to build with them. So there could be something more comprehensive, I think, in
That would be
vein.
helpful.
Yeah.
I don't forget, but as someone who's using heat pumps and then just a wee bit of oil.
Right.
I don't think with that lens.
But no, so that's, I think, why we really feel primary ownership over the heat pump experience that folks have, the calculation, the rebates, everything that goes into it. I'm assuming that's kind of the thinking that the team had.
And we could perhaps add a broader piece of language and then say like, comma, with special focus on heat pumps,
Right.
or we don't have to, and heat pumps can be part of it.
I'd like it just shouts out to me like as a preferential piece, and I understand, that's a helpful reminder, thank you. Like, that's obviously not gonna be the solution that's gonna address everything, right? So if there's a way to call out, in this language to address it to what you were saying, Mike, and also when you actually work on this tool to like coordinate with VGS to say, hey, how can we actually give more of a whole building, whole home calculator?
Excellent.
That would be really helpful.
Okay, we can refine this for July.
That'd be great. Thank you.
I also support that. I think from the old days, there were some real fights. I was in on some of them about putting solar panels on poorly insulated houses, that sort of thing. So the overall global optimization, sure.
And I would say as well, to the extent other ideas come to you over the next few weeks, we'll continue to kind of hold the document open. We can edit it really up to the next meeting. So if you're thinking about it or reading it over time, we welcome additional thoughts.
Thanks. So, next, I'm imagining this will be relatively quick, is the addition of Emily Byrne to the signatory list for BED accounts. This is a discussion and a vote.
And I think, if I'm understanding correctly, that the language before you, to avoid having to have these types of periodic changes, would be to kind of have the position descriptions that are eligible to be signatories approved by the commission, as opposed to the person. Because I think periodically we've had to do this, and it would be, it's really the position that's the signatory, not the person. So I think the language before you makes that change.
So is this looks like it's a resolution as opposed to a vote?
It'd still be a vote, and it just would, instead of having a person's name on it, it's focused on the positions that we can have as a signatory. And I think resolution, because that's the language that the financial institutions might prefer. But it's still just a vote, I think.
How does this read as a motion? Does it declare it now?
I make, maybe we just say approve the following positions as signatories on all BED accounts?
Would that work? I'm just saying make a motion to authorize the signers of the treasury.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But can I ask a question before we do that? So I do remember, we actually, I think we had only Jim Byrne on many of the accounts at one point. And Neil was on some of them, and then, so then you were added, and then Emily was added, and I understand, you know, and all the positions make sense. I guess just going to sort of checks and balances, and recalling in one of our audits, like 3-4 years ago, the challenge to find equipment that like was taken out of the back room. Is there any, what are the pieces put in place here to ensure that everybody's coordinated, connected in terms of who's signing what, and that there is oversight if you end up having 4 people signing for McNeil generating station accounts, that you have sort of that oversight coordination?
I don't know if Emily wants to speak to that.
Sure. So I think in practice, operationally, that generally speaking, the director of finance is the person doing most of the transactions and then consulting as needed with myself and then as needed with the general manager. And so we are careful to manage communication and relationships with the financial institutions, and that, yeah, all 3 of us are in the loop on sort of, you know, for example, we had to, now that we have received the revenue bond funds, we have the $20 million that are sitting with the bond trustee in a construction fund. We're able to invest that money in the construction fund in treasury bills, for example, while it sits there before, as we, you know, wait to draw it down as we do projects, right? And so the person that we work with to manage those investments, you know, kind of reached out to myself and Emily to say, okay, how would you like to invest this money? So I think having the commission approve a resolution like this that says these are who we deem to be the authorized signers is actually a form of internal control. And then the banking institutions also have a matching list that says, okay, I've received instructions from a person, I've spoken to them on the phone, I've got their email address, right? I know that this is Emily Byrne or Emily Stebbins-Wheelock, and they are an authorized signer for BED.
Okay. Thanks. So now, if folks want to make a motion.
So does this eliminate our making these decisions periodically from here on in?
Well, typically, the only time we would make them is if we had a staffing change.
Right.
So we wouldn't have to bring it back to you, my understanding, if, you know, if I was to leave tomorrow, the next general manager would automatically be considered a signer, and you wouldn't have to approve them as a signer, just by virtue of their position, as long as you're comfortable with that.
And I heard your question more as, there are certain financial decisions that come before us based off of a financial cap or trigger, and then there are others that don't. And that's what I was hearing your question to be, but was Darren hearing it correctly?
I think Darren was hearing it correctly.
Okay.
Great.
For these positions,
Right.
regardless of when they change down the road,
Right.
it's assumed that they are part of a signatory.
Would be an appropriate signatory.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right, should I try?
Sure.
I make a motion that the authorized signers of treasury, banking, and other asset management accounts for the Burlington Electric Department shall be the employees in the following positions. For department accounts, general manager, manager of strategy and innovation, director of finance. For for McNeil Generating Station accounts, General Manager, Manager of Strategy and Innovation, COO, and Manager of Utility Services and Engineering, Director of Finance.
Second.
Discussion on the motion?
Sure.
What if, I mean, we've seen departmental and hierarchy changes over the last few years. What if those change down the road?
If we changed
that?
positions, we would need to come back to you. I think we'll always have a director of finance, and hopefully we'll always have a general manager. The
Some of them are
positions,
obvious, but-
Munir's position and Emily's position have had some naming changes in the past, so if we had a change, we would update those if they were no longer consistent. Yep.
Second?
You said you-
No, I don't think I can second, but all in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Okay.
So next up is a street lighting primer. This is a discussion with a potential expected executive session, and for folks watching, the next agenda item is a Moran frame update, which is a discussion as well as an expected executive session. So it might make sense to have the primer, see where we land, and then if we definitely feel like, yes, we need to go into executive session, we leave that and we then get the Moran frame update, talk through that, and then go into one expected executive session instead of in, out, in, out, in, out.
I think that's what I did.
Cover both subjects, yeah.
That's why you put them together, yep. So just for folks at home, last summer, there were quite a few streetlights that were replaced and updated according to certain standards. And commission members heard from a number of Burlingtonians asking, you know, is this really necessary? This feels like overkill. And where do these stats come from, or where do these standards come from? And our crew spent quite a bit of time going out into the field to talk with people, identify areas that either the lights could be tilted differently or addressed, but ultimately stayed with the standards. And so the commission promised to the homeowners that we would pick this up and dig into it a little bit more so that we all, since some of us weren't here in 2017, so that we all have an understanding of what the standards are, what they do, where the conversation is in terms of why various communities stand with the standards and maybe some others don't, and what the pros and cons are to different approaches. So that is the purpose of this after a long-winded intro. And Andy, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. So, good evening, everyone. So I'll just jump right in. I figured I would just start with a little recap of things I've presented in the past. So I've mainly focused on our street lighting policy, what it means, what we follow, how we decide where we're doing projects and when. So today I wanted to get into more about the standards that we follow and maybe explain our design process a little bit more. So just to recap, as we've talked about in the past, we have the responsibility, BD has the responsibility of lighting the accepted streets in Burlington, and we follow our street lighting policy, which has been adopted by the commission. The key point to take away from this slide is that our street lighting is designed to conform to Illuminating Engineering Society, or IES, recommendations for lighting levels. And what we look at for that is their document. It's actually an adopted ANSI standard, but it's Roadway Lighting Design Handbook called RP8. And as projects are designed, we refer to the current edition. And this is all kind of review, but I'll just go through it quickly. The fixtures are modeled using a road template, and we look at the light levels on both the street and the sidewalk. And the goal is obviously to choose an energy efficient fixture that provides adequate lighting on both the street and the sidewalk, and we try to minimize the spill beyond the sidewalks. So to jump into what we mean when we say lighting levels, because there's a lot of different criteria that we actually look at when we're designing a street lighting project. One of the first things is called luminance. And basically what that is, it's a measurement of the light emitting, passing through, or reflected by a surface. So bottom line there is that we use the term luminance to evaluate the lighting that we have for the roadway itself, so the part of the road that people are driving on. And to dive in a little bit further with that, in terms of roadway luminance, it's looking at a specific point as seen from a specific observer position. So again, this is all getting technical, but the main point I wanted to make with this is that when we're looking at the road itself, it actually depends on the direction of the travel lane, because the luminance actually has a reference point. So when it says observer on my slide here, what that means is the motorist in the vehicle.
So it's like somebody sitting in a car a certain distance from the light, how much light is there?
You're going to kind of see on the surface of the road from that vantage point. The next term that we look at is called illuminance. So this really, it gets confusing because the terms sound so similar to each other. Different units for that. It's a measurement of the amount of light falling onto something and spreading over a surface. And what we use that for is evaluating sidewalks, crosswalks, and intersections, anything that involves pedestrians. And what it really correlates to is how a human would perceive the brightness of an area. And it does not depend on location or direction like the roadway luminance does. So continuing with a couple more things that we look at, the next group of terms is called uniformity. So that's really a ratio to make sure we don't have a large variation in the perceived brightness. So we don't want to have areas where we go from really bright to really dark in between. We want it to be relatively uniform over the entire area. So we actually look at the average and the maximum. So those are just two different mathematical ratios of average to minimum and maximum to minimum. And then finally, there's another one called veiling luminance. And just to try and briefly sum that one up, it's looking at glare. So we don't want to have fixtures that are going to create a lot of glare for drivers, because it can be distracting and cause issues. So I've talked about some of the terms. Now I'll get into some of the classifications for streets. So when we're looking at lighting, it's not really a one-size-fits-all approach. We don't use the same lighting levels on a residential street that we would on like a major road like Shelburne Street or Main Street. So in the IES recommendations, they have different street classifications going from major, collector to local, so from highest to lowest lighting levels. And DPW has actually provided us with a list of all the streets in Burlington and what their classification are. So like I mentioned, some of the busier streets are the majors. The collectors are ones kind of like some of the busier but not as busy streets, like think of like Cherry Street or Bank Street or ones like that. And then you get down to the locals, that's like your residential streets. So then getting into sidewalks, the classification for the sidewalks is actually driven by, oh, went too far, sorry about that. Let me go back. The lighting levels for sidewalks are driven by the expected, what they refer to as conflict levels, so high, medium, and low. And just based on some historical data that we've looked at in the past, the downtown core area, which really would be the busiest part of Burlington for pedestrians, is only considered medium in the eyes of what the IES recommendations are. Our residential streets are considered low conflict. And then to make it even more confusing, the edition that we had looked at in the past for this has the low pedestrian conflict even further broken down into 3 more categories. So it's like rural, low density, and medium. To make it a little bit simpler, the good thing is we only have to look at medium density because it's based on 2 to 6 dwellings or houses per acre, which is really what you're going to find in Burlington. So hopefully you're still with me. It's a lot of terminology here. So I just have some tables on the next few slides, just kind of showing how the numbers change as you look at the different, I don't know if you can see yeah. So this is really the lighting criteria for streets. And you can see, you have your major, collector, and local. And the pedestrian conflict actually does factor into the street itself as well. But you can see the numbers do go down roughly, the difference between major and local is about half the light level required. And then there's, the uniformity ratios and the veiling luminance are fairly similar. On the local streets, we actually do allow for a little bit more variation, so that would mean we'd need fewer lights. And then just looking at sidewalks, there's a lot of information here, but I've kind of circled in red, and I'm sorry that part of it's covered up, but circled in red the ones that we're looking at. These are for the sidewalks, so for the medium areas, the levels for the sidewalks are a little bit higher than for what we're looking at for low, medium. And then intersections, if I go backwards here, we can see, we'll pick like the one in the center there, the average luminance for the walkways in medium areas is 0.5 foot candles. If we go to an intersection, it's significantly higher. The idea being that you might have pedestrians crossing the street in an intersection. So as far as our design process, so now we have all these levels that we have to meet, and we have a project that we're going to look at, and what do we do? So for each project that we're looking at, we actually build what they call a grid calculation system. And we actually use a CAD drawing that we have of the entire city for that. And the CAD is based on actual GPS data and also orthographic imagery, so it's fairly accurate as far as where things are. So we include the streets, sidewalks, any driveways, houses, etc., so we know where things are. And all of our facilities are mapped out as well. And we have separate grids for the travel lanes, the sidewalks, intersections, so on and so forth. And we just, start placing, it's a little design exercise, you just start placing the lights and run the calculation to see if you're meeting the levels that you need based on where that street is located. And as far as where we put lights, we obviously try to keep to existing poles first. Existing poles where we have lights. If we can upgrade a light to get the levels we need. If that's not enough, we'll try and add them to any existing utility poles that might be in the area. And if that's not enough, then we'll obviously resort to putting in another pole if needed. So in laying these projects out, some of the challenges we run into is really, like it says there, it's a balancing act. We want to choose the lowest output fixture that allows us to meet the minimum criteria. So again, there's two sets there, the roadway and the sidewalk. So you're looking at the levels and the uniformity for both, and then the glare for the roadway. One of the challenges is actually related to the fact that our fixtures follow what they call the bug system, which I may have talked about before. It's backlight, uplight, glare, which is a system that IES came up with to basically limit the amount of light spilling beyond where we're intending to light. So the B in bug stands for backlight. So the fixtures that we're putting in have, if you think of it like a cone coming down from the light, the amount of light that comes behind the fixture is limited. The problem we run into a lot when we're placing lights is that we're trying to light a sidewalk that's behind the light fixture. So you don't get a whole lot of light from that fixture, so you end up sometimes effectively lighting the sidewalk from the opposite side of the road because the light comes out more forward from the fixture and less to the rear. So the result that the result that we can sometimes get from that is that the sidewalks actually end up driving the lighting levels more than the roadway. So we're fine on the roadway levels, but the sidewalks are lower than what they're supposed to be. So we have to put in more lights or brighter lights. So we have made things a little bit better with that historical challenge. Back in 2020, we did make a revision to the policy, which I brought here to this meeting. So some of the things that have been made possible by our changes there are basically a little bit more flexibility in the equipment that we can choose. So now we can actually use a shorter arm. So for that challenge with sidewalks, if you have a shorter street lighting arm, your fixture is closer to the pole, meaning you can get a little bit more light onto the sidewalk. And then it also opened up the possibility of using different heights of poles. So a shorter pole would tend to be a little bit less obtrusive to the neighborhood, but the only drawback there is that you may end up needing more poles because since the light's closer to the ground, it doesn't spread out as far, and you might need to put more in to maintain that uniformity that I referred to earlier. So as far as where we are with all of this, some of the things we have in progress right now, we kind of touched on this earlier, some of the feedback we've got from customers, and we've talked about at this meeting. We're looking at the feasibility of reducing lighting levels in certain areas of the city, primarily residential areas. So back in January, we reached out to IAS for some clarification on a couple of items that we noticed in their standard. They had a note about departing from recommended lighting levels requires a thorough investigation, but it doesn't really explain what that means. And the title of that section was actually when residential street lighting may not be needed. And then there was another subsection beyond that that mentioned that streets with travel speed below 30 miles an hour says streetlights may not be necessary for driver vision, but says that it doesn't address lighting for pedestrians. So we reached out to them trying to dig into those two items a little bit further to see if there's something we could possibly do to maybe reduce lighting in certain areas. We also asked them if they had any advice or direction on whether there's a venue for asking questions like this, and whether a membership would give us any additional benefits or assistance. So as of now, we still haven't gotten a response from them. We've continued to reach out, and they've been promising us that someone's going to get in touch with us, and it hasn't happened yet, which is really frustrating for us. So in the meantime, Commissioner Sebbins has reached out to IES, and she did receive a reply from their Director of Education and Standards, and just sent a link to a bunch of publications, which is less than helpful. However, we did get some interesting information from that. We did discover that there is a new version of the RP8 handbook. So we've gotten ourselves a copy of that, and we're currently evaluating it to see what's changed and if there's anything in there that we can utilize to potentially reduce lighting levels. So that's what I had for that portion of the presentation. I feel like I just talked a lot, so does anyone have any questions?
Well,
Yes.
if we've been doing it and we continue to do it, why are our customers concerned? What's changed?
I don't-
Is it just their perception? Or
It could be. I honestly don't know a good answer to that question. I'm not sure that we've really changed anything with our practices.
At the Richardson area,
It-
you guys were updating areas
Yeah.
by year, like bit by bit, and they finally got to Richardson, and I guess it's been a while since it's been updated, so it was a distinct difference for the people there.
Yeah, there were certain areas of the city, or still are certain areas of the city, where there's clearly not been a lighting study done, and there's maybe 1 or 2 light fixtures per block. And so when we go from that to meeting the standards, it's a pretty significant change.
So, why would you be going into executive session? What legal, what would be,
So,
what's the onus, like?
For some of the historical background, as far as, why we're following the IAS and things related to that, that's, some of the information relating to that is confidential. So we anticipated possibly needing executive session for that.
I think we could have a few more questions, more neutral.
Yeah.
Well, okay, there is this criticism made over the years, I'm old enough to remember them, about how the lighting recommendations / standards typically go up over time, kind of reflecting the idea that when in doubt, more light is better. And so I've heard some comments, but they're anecdotal, in which there weren't any new poles or new fixtures. There were new bulbs, LEDs typically. So I understand if you go to a street that maybe had no standards applied to it ever, and then you apply new standards, there's going to be more light, and there should be. But other times, I wonder if light is also just going up on streets that already met whatever standards we had. And is that because the new standards are brighter, or just accidental? Because
I think
Yeah.
there may be a perceived difference if you were to compare a newer LED fixture to an older, say, high-pressure sodium fixture. You know, especially with the high-pressure sodium, if they've been out in the field for a long time, they do degrade over time. And LED tends to we actually purchase fixtures that maintain a constant light output over time.
Okay, so in that case, the luminance would have gone up.
If it were an older fixture, that's quite possible, yeah.
I just want to say, I think that this is great, right? It's spot on. Everybody's being treated equally according to a set of standards and categories. The application of those standards, sometimes there's variations, right? Because equipment changes or something like that. But that's what we have as public servants. That's the way that things have to be done, because there are user conflicts. Somebody on the sidewalk wants good light, somebody in the house, maybe they don't until there's a crime problem, and they, like, so you can't win, but you have a strategy, you have a framework, and you're applying it universally across the city. I think that's the right answer.
One of the pieces that wasn't an eye-opener for me was that although we call them standards, they're not like standards you must comply with.
Yeah.
Technically, we don't have to comply with these, but I do think it would be helpful for viewers or whatnot, to the degree that we can talk about the fact that we have gotten legal guidance to follow these, otherwise, what are you following, and how do you make, to your point about
Yeah.
consistency?
Yeah.
What are you following, and how are you identifying what those alternative choices may be? What is the process? Whereas in this case, there is, a lengthy process with a lot of, lighting experts who spend all their time doing this, but I know I cut you off.
Well, okay. There is a movement out there about questioning light levels, including astronomers, no surprise there. And they really don't like uplight at all. But also various green arguments. And although we have a precedent here, a legal one, which I guess we'll get into in our closed session, there are precedents out there for people that are cutting back with justification, but the bottom line is they get away with it, to put it mildly. I had a list of these once upon a time. I've been asking or suggesting that somebody should be a reporter and go out and dig these up because I think they're proliferating, but I haven't done it. Del Mar, California, I mentioned there were 4 communities in Vermont as of 5 years ago, 6 years ago, which they had cut back the number of lights. To what level? I'm not sure. So is there any argument for that? Well, is the poetry about being able to see the Milky Way? That's the thing about only 10% or whatever it is, 20%, 40% of Americans can see the Milky Way. If there were no precedent, we'd have to drop it right there. But I think there are, but I'm no legal person. Do we want to bother to investigate that? It looks like it's going to take some work. Maybe we should discuss that, but that's out there. Otherwise, we can just say there are recommendations which we have adopted as standards which keep us protected and in service to our customers, and that's the end of it. And everything will be dictated by the IES.
Have we heard from, some of the customers that you were working with last summer? Have we heard anything back from them in the last several months?
Not to my knowledge, anything recently. I think I may have alluded to it earlier, but we do try to handle these on a case-by-case basis because obviously nothing's one size fits all. But we do try to work with the customer and listen to their concerns, and we do look at, if we can put a shield in or something like that and still maintain the levels that we need. We definitely do that where we can.
Does the department identified as any or note of any of where some of these pockets of low light or fixtures that haven't been touched in a number of years? Is there any sort of knowledge of where those still might be around the city
So,
that haven't been looked at? Or
as we're doing our projects, we have a record and a plan that we keep up to date, with when we've updated it. And we've gone back as far as we have records, which, again, it's an internal thing, but we have a fairly decent handle on what's been looked at and what hasn't. And we have an actual capital plan that's behind it, so we try and do a certain number of streets a year as our budget allows, just to get streets up to lighting standards. And it's prioritized based on a number of things, including, customer requests for lighting evaluation. There might be city projects or BED projects where we're doing work in the area, and we're, for efficiency reasons, we'll do the street lighting work at the same time.
So I've heard one commissioner say, good to have these standards. We're treating people equally and trying to balance and thread the needle, which is challenging with competing interests. And another commissioner say, there's an alternative view, and we're starting to see communities that are, revisiting this. And I guess, I could imagine we say, all right, well, we have standards, and we will hear a little bit about some of the legal precedent. Can we talk about any of that in open session, or is that really only executive?
Paul might have the best
I prefer
sense
to
of that.
discuss it in executive only, but if you have generic questions, I could address them here.
I just think if anyone, since we don't have a lot of public comment often, and one of the few times we've had it is on this issue. So for anyone who might be watching this in the future, I think it would be helpful for them to know that there has been some legal precedent and legal guidance. And if you felt comfortable at all articulating that so that someone could hear that. So it's not just here are the standards and we follow them, period. But here are the
Sure.
standards and we have been following them. And it is according to some sort of guidance we've been receiving.
Right, no, you summarized it well. I think in general, just the insurance, the legal, the claim, the risk management world, no one's more risk adverse in that group. And so if we hear about lowering lighting issues, as long as we're meeting the standards that IES set, or the guidelines, you call them what you want, but as long as we're meeting that, things in general are good. If we have a claim or an accident or a call from BPD, that's when the lighting issue is going to be heavily scrutinized, and we would not want to be below those standards because of a particular call from a customer that says they have trouble sleeping at night because it's too bright in their living room, that kind of stuff. So in general, we have had, and all utilities have had those type of claims or incidents, and that's about as far as I'd like to go into that detail, but.
So we, I guess, for commissioners, this kind of sounds like a homework assignment in terms of what you were saying. You keep saying a reporter, but we do not have a reporter volunteering to do that right now. So it sounds like an internship or something like that, or one of your students from another time. But to the commissioners, is this an area that you'd want to look into further to dig in a bit?
Okay, let me answer. Even I would say, maybe no. Maybe not more. It's kind of a question of how much personal energy I have for this, I think. I may be involved deeply one way or the other. If,
We can also, we also
yeah.
don't have all of the commission members here, and Commissioner Shagnon was one of the ones who felt very strongly that we stay with IES, and actually, I think he wanted some of the streets brighter. Maybe you just haven't gotten to them yet, Andy. We can also, mull this over and talk through this a little bit more in July, when we have all 5 of us, and see from there. Because it does require some homework to actually look at what other communities have done, what have the risks been, what did they do. It's not a light undertaking.
I mean,
Well,
how
I'll-
are
I'll
we
also mention
suggesting,
again.
how are we suggesting to deviate from IES?
My sense is that a number of communities have. And what are their reasons? Not sure of all of them. Some of them have to do with just less light. There is also, this is old stuff, right? When I was looking into this way back, 2017, even before, there is a cadre of consultants out there who say we can do better by, in the end, by changing the varying levels as you go down the street and so on and so on. You maintain contrast with a lower light level. And that was creeping into the field, I thought. There was academic work going on at Virginia Tech, all about to come out back then, and then it got delayed, like IES. So I think the answer is yes.
So, yes, there are communities that are straying from it, and the question would be, what are they
Do we
doing?
want to be one of those communities?
Or what are they doing and what are the
Are they comparable
risks?
What are the
communities?
risks?
I think that's an important question to ask,
they
like, are we comparing
comparable?
ourselves to Fairhaven or something? Right, because we have a different level of issues in Burlington,
Sure, sure.
and we want pedestrians, and we want people to feel safe walking down the street.
Which is why Mike,
Okay, well,
stay with IES and the fact that there's plenty of evidence that we've tried to reach out to them to the nth degree for further, we've shown that we've done our due diligence to,
well, I think that covers us. I mean, if we just use it, although I was kind of joking, saying we don't literally know what they're saying today, right? Is that correct?
We just got the latest version, and we're in the middle of evaluating it to see what's changed, so. Fingers
So-
crossed that it actually has some relief for us, maybe some options, or maybe they've changed.
what's the printing date? I mean, is it pretty,
It's within the last year.
there you go.
It's unfortunately, from what we've seen so far, there's no summary of changes, so we're kind of digging through the pertinent sections that we would look at and trying to find out what the differences are, so.
So with that, how thick is it? Do you think you can get through it by July?
It is.
Or do you need August? Or,
About 600 pages.
oh, good, okay.
Which by the
Light
two
reading.
next July.
Yeah.
Oh, I made a pun and didn't even,
That was a good one, actually. So I'm going to suggest that you don't have to read that all by July. And,
Your
I mean,
homework
this is, as I said, this is not a light endeavor. I'm sorry. But it's if someone gets hurt and sues the city, sues Burlington Electric because there wasn't enough lighting, that's real. On the other hand, we also know that there are, issues that we've seen with biodiversity because of overlighting. And we've heard from, not necessarily here in Burlington, but we've heard from, I think this is the 3rd topic we've actually had public comments on since I've been here for 10 years, I think. So I'm going to suggest that you think about how long it'll take you to get through 600 pages. We historically have not necessarily met in August, so that's something to think about. We're not going to make a decision on this quickly. I think if there are any changes, it needs to be very, very thoughtful and very, very careful. So do you think you might have read through them all by September?
I think that's reasonable.
Especially if you delegate a few.
Look through it and see what we might need to change.
Okay, I also should volunteer for something. So I will contact the usual suspects and others I can dig up and see what I can find about what's been done. It won't be the hardcore reportage I talked about, but it'll be more than nothing.
Great.
And the timescale we're on is,
September.
okay. Okay, you heard it here. I'll do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm also mindful that you guys generally are doing quite a bit, so I know this is, another task. So to the degree that come July, you're like, wow, I still haven't even touched any 600 pages, let Darren know, and we can talk through it again.
Given what we've said here, do you think that this closed session is still appropriate? I would argue yes, but.
Well, we're probably going to have to go into an expected executive session anyway for the Moran frame update and MOU. So let's shift over to agenda item number 9, Moran frame update and MOU discussion. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Paul. And that's you, Darren.
I think the most I can say, similar to last time, is that BED and the city have had discussions around potential liability contributions from the department to the city relative to the Moran site. And we had consulted with the commission, I think, back in, I believe it was January, if I'm remembering correctly, on this during executive session. And we would like opportunity to provide some limited updates on what would be a potential agreement between the city and BED on this topic, so that the commission has a chance to hear from us and weigh in before we would move forward with something.
Okay. And we have Commissioner Moody, who's going to make a motion.
All right. I make a motion that premature general public knowledge of BED's history, background, and legal cases relating to street lighting would clearly place the Burlington Electric and Moran Plant MOU would clearly place the Burlington Electric Department at a substantial disadvantage per Title I, Section 313A1 of Vermont statutes.
Second. Everyone, does someone want to make a second?
Oh, second.
Sorry.
Okay.
I thought you said you did.
I can't make a second.
You're asking. There's a
Yes.
question mark after
For the
that
way you
word.
said it was so like.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
Like, okay.
Second?
I second the motion.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
I make the motion to enter into executive session with Burlington Electric Department staff and council to discuss the Moran plant and street lighting under provisions of Title I, Section 313A1A of Vermont statutes.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. So let us know when we're off.